It took me only 10 minutes to run to the hotel where Kusada Yoshika was staying. When I arrived, I saw an ambulance and a police car in front of the hotel. There was also a large crowd at the door watching the excitement. I was almost crazy with fear. I pushed through the crowd with my elbows and rushed inside. When I reached the hotel entrance, I saw a stretcher being carried out. The moment I saw the ski coach walking beside the stretcher, my blood seemed to freeze. At the same time, I heard two police officers talking. One said, "She tried to hang herself with nylon stockings." The other said, "Luckily they found her early." I stood there like a wooden man. There was no need to ask. The person on the stretcher had to be Kusada Yoshiko, the beautiful and gentle girl who had been with me less than half an hour ago. When I heard that her suicide had failed, I finally breathed out. That made me believe even more clearly that after seeing blue blood, a person would begin to think of suicide. The connection between blue blood and suicide was too strange and mysterious. I watched the stretcher being lifted into the ambulance. I also heard many reporters asking the ski coach questions. The coach had clearly been badly shocked. No matter what they asked, he said nothing. I kept standing there without moving. Only after the crowd slowly left did I turn around and walk away. The snow was still falling heavily. Everything looked almost the same as it had 1 hour before. But now, a lovely young woman had suddenly tried to kill herself. Of course, her life as an athlete was also over. Naturally, this was only without reason to other people. To me, it was not completely without reason. I had already guessed that after Kusada Yoshika saw a man whose blood was blue, she might begin to think about suicide, just like Lam V and I had done years ago. That was why I had told her to find someone to stay with her tonight. But I still could not understand why a person could have blue blood and why everyone who saw it would want to end their own life. It was a mystery with no answer. My mind was full of confusion. I felt that I had fallen into something that did not belong to science, but to something dark and strange. My steps felt very heavy. When I was almost back at Madame Fuji's inn, the night had grown deeper. The snow had still not stopped. The road was even quieter than before. And whenever I stopped thinking about this matter, I immediately felt a strange fear. It felt as if I stood in the open, while many hungry wolves were hiding in the dark and watching me. I took a deep breath and stopped walking. I had to calm my mind before I could continue. I am not a coward, but the fear inside me then was completely strange. In truth, everything around me was silent. Nothing unusual was there. In fact, if something really happened, I believed I could deal with it. And yet, that feeling of fear kept attacking me. I stood there for a moment. I felt as if somewhere not far from me, there was someone who wanted me to die. And I was afraid, because somehow I already knew his wish. This sounded absurd. Scientists had once said that when people think, their brains give off waves. So-called telepathy might simply be one person receiving another person's brainwaves. Of course, that idea had never been fully accepted. And besides, whose brainwaves was I receiving now? Who could have such power that his thoughts could become waves strong enough for me to feel? When I thought of this, I suddenly felt that I had found a small clue. Lam V, I, and Kusada Yoshiko had all suddenly wanted to end our lives. It was possible that another person with brainwaves stronger than ours had influenced us, putting us into a hypnotic state so that his thoughts ruled our actions. But when I thought more deeply, it all felt too unreal. I forced myself to walk on. Everything around me was quiet beyond belief. The heavy snow not only covered all ugly and beautiful things on the earth, but also buried every sound. I had been walking with my head down. Only when I saw the poplar tree did I lift my head. Madame Fuji's inn was now very near. When I looked up, I saw two dim yellow lights ahead. Of course, they were the lamps in front of the inn. I let out a breath. At last, I had reached the mouth of a side street. Once I crossed that side street, I would be at the inn. But just as I came to it, I saw a man standing under a street lamp. I was startled. He stood there without moving. The collar of his coat was turned up high. He wore a hat. Snow had piled thickly on his shoulders. It was clear that he had been standing there for a long time. I was surprised, but I did not stop walking. A man standing in the snow so late at night was certainly suspicious, but it was not a thing to fear too much. Still, because I had to pass him, I stayed careful. I slowed my steps and walked past him. And in the very moment I passed by his side, my mind shook. I felt that someone called my name, Wesley. But my ears had heard no sound. Everything around me was terribly quiet. There was no way I could hear a voice and think I had heard nothing. That was the strange part. I heard nothing, and yet I felt that someone had called me. I stopped at once and turned around. At that same moment, the man also turned around and looked up at me. Although his hat was low, I could see his face clearly. His face was terribly pale, with a blue color in it. Just looking at him made my heart grow cold. And I knew this man. He looked almost the same as when I last saw him, although more than 10 years had passed. It was Fuang Tian. I was stunned. He was stunned too. He spoke first. Wei Si Li, it is you. It really is you. Then he muttered something I could not hear clearly. After that he said, You did not. He stopped, unable to go on. When Kusada Yoshiko told me her story, I had already guessed that the man she saw must have been Fuang Tian. A man with blue blood, there might be only one such person in the whole world. But I had never imagined that I would suddenly meet him like this. Before he could finish, I said, I did not die. A very strange look appeared on Fuang Tian's face. He lowered his head and murmured, Wei Si Li, you are a good person. I have always remembered you. You are a good person. As he spoke like that, thoughts of death and suicide suddenly rose in my mind again. My heart began beating wildly. This was more terrible than any murder. This blue-blooded man had the power to make people obey his will and kill themselves. I fought with all my strength to push away those thoughts. I was not the same as I had been more than 10 years ago. Back then, I had been a simple young man. Now, I had much more experience. I also knew that his strange power must have something to do with hypnosis, and I understood the theory of mental resistance in hypnosis. That theory says that if the mind of the hypnotist is weaker than the mind of the person being controlled, then the hypnotist may be pushed back instead. So at that moment, I forced myself to stay calm. I gripped those strange thoughts tightly and refused to let them take over. Fun Fien and I stood facing each other for 6 or 7 minutes. I could feel that the wish to die in my mind was becoming weaker and weaker. I knew that in this invisible struggle, which was extremely dangerous, I had begun to win. And just then, Phuong Thien sighed, suddenly turned around, and started walking away. Because all my attention had been focused on fighting those thoughts, my mind was slow to react. So when I saw him turn and leave, I did not know what to do. Only after he had gone 7 or 8 steps did I shout, "Stop! Stop!" I shouted and ran after him. He did not stop. But I had strong training in Chinese martial arts. I moved very quickly and soon caught up with him. He stopped at last. In a low, hard voice, I demanded, "Who are you? What are you really?" Phuong Thien looked very upset, and mixed with that sadness was fear. He was breathing hard. "Wei Si Li, you have won. I may die by your hand. I may never return home, but do not force me. Do not force me to use my weapon." At first, when I heard him speak of returning home, I could not understand him at all. But when I heard his last words, I was shocked. At the same time, he lifted his hand. I looked at it. In his hand was a shining silver box. It was about the size of a small radio, but on top of it were 2 metal tubes like the feelers of a snail. I had never seen such a weapon before. I asked immediately, "What is that?" Phuong Thien said, "You would not understand, but do not force me to use it. I do not want to hurt anyone. I only want to stay alive and wait for a chance to go home. Do you understand? I have a home." The more he spoke, the more excited he became. His face also turned more blue, and my confusion grew deeper. Who is stopping you from going home?" He lifted his head and looked once at the sky, then lowered it again. "You, I beg you, just act as if you have never seen me at all. Do not tell anyone and do not even think about me. Can you?" Before he finished, tears had appeared in his eyes. I stood silent for a long moment. Then I said, "I will ask only one thing." Phuong Thien said nothing. I asked, "Lam Vi, I, and Kusada Yoshiko all saw the blood in your body. It was blue, and all of us had thoughts of suicide. Can you tell me why that happened?" Before I could finish, Phuong Thien began to tremble all over. His hand moved slightly. In that instant, I saw his fingers press something on the silver box. At the same time, I heard a very soft sound, a tiny hiss. Then, suddenly, in front of my eyes, there flashed a burning light. It was unbelievably bright and unbelievably hot. In less than 1/100th of a second, I lost consciousness and fell onto the snow. In the last moment before I fainted, I seemed to hear Phuong Thien crying out, "Do not force me!